Hello, and welcome to our inaugural Power Speaking Live event. Thank you so much for investing your time today in what is sure to be, yes, we're ready, sure to be a very active, insightful conversation. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, and I am the CEO of Power Speaking Incorporated and your host for this new series that we'll be holding on a monthly basis. Now, in honor of Women's History Month, we're going to be talking about the power of mentorships and sponsorships. Throughout this session, we'll be exploring the transformative power of gaining and working with a mentor, as well as the enrichment and benefit that you get from mentoring other women and girls yourself. Our goal today, regardless of where you are in your career journey, is that you come away with something, a new idea, fresh perspective, inspiration that you can apply to advance your career and overall success. Now, I have the honor of introducing to you three very distinguished women. With us today, we have Dr. Bindu Garapati, who is Vice President of Talent and Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity for Impossible Foods. Also joining us is Carla Barano. Carla is the Senior Vice President of Global Engineering and Facilities for the Pharma Technical Operations of Genentech. And finally, joining us from Uganda, we have Erna Gratz. Erna is the CEO of the Sante Africa Foundation. I should also note that all three of these accomplished women are members of our Power Speaking Advisory Board. Now, merely sharing their titles does not give justice to their illustrious careers. So I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to share just a little bit about your career journey, because I think that'll help to provide context to the insights and advice that you'll be sharing and why it is you're so passionate about this topic. Bindu, would you kick us off?
Of course. Thank you so much, Carrie, and welcome to each and every one of you. As Carrie mentioned, I'm Bindu Garapati. I have to lead with why I'm so passionate about this. I could not be where I am today, emotionally, professionally, spiritually, without the amazing mentors and sponsors that I've had along my journey. And I think it stems from childhood. You don't realize what kinds of mentors we have as children. But when I look back at my professional career and reflect on all the twists and turns that I have taken, I started out as a clinician. My doctorate's in clinical psychology. As you can imagine, I'm a first-generation South Asian woman that grew up in the middle of the Midwest. And as you can imagine, being able to navigate complex situations is so important to rely on a mentor throughout. So started out in the clinical world, moved through academia, healthcare, nonprofit, moved out to the Bay Area, really expanded in my own executive coaching practice called The Happy Leader, really looking at that intersection of leadership, culture, and identity. And a common theme that comes throughout all of that is in my research in the Happy Leader space is really looking at how we pay it forward. And part of that is serving as mentors. So moved through technology, biotech, and here I am at Impossible Foods. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Bindu. How about you, Carla?
Oh, thanks, Carrie. And Bindu, so much about what you said really resonates with me as well. So I actually have been 36 years at Roche and Genentech, and actually am entering the next phase of my career next month. I'm actually going to be retiring from Genentech and thinking about what that phase of my career journey will be. But when I think back to my childhood, similar, Bindu, what you were saying, my dad was my first mentor, and he encouraged me to pursue a field in engineering and this was back in the mid-late 70s when you just didn't see that happening a lot. So it was really exciting for me to have the confidence to pursue this field. And over the course of my 36 years at Genentech and Roche, I started off in manufacturing, was a process engineer, went into engineering project management, went into functional leadership, and then had the wonderful opportunity to work in many different parts of the business And the role that I'm leaving, as Carrie mentioned, is the head of global engineering. Have been in that role for 3 years. And prior to that, I was the site head for the South San Francisco campus, where I oversaw all real estate, employee services. I'm sure many of you have seen the buses on the road for those of you that live in the Bay Area. But it's really been through the support of mentors that I've had that's really helped me navigate what is, I think, a career that I've been super proud of, and hopefully can set and be an inspiration for others. So it's just excited to be here and talking with all of you.
And congratulations on your upcoming new chapter.
Yeah, everybody sees that big old grin on my face.
Thank you, Carla. Erna, what about you?
Yes, very similarly. Starting in a single parent household, most of my mentors and teachers came from my teachers in high school, and then my professors. And honestly, much like you, Bindu, much of where I am came because people saw potential in me before I did. And most of my career, I'm trained as an electrical engineer with up to a master's degree. And I spent the first quarter of my career at a nuclear defense lab, Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And then I transitioned to Silicon Valley, and I see many of our guests here today are from Silicon Valley. I worked in both the semiconductor industry, followed by many, many, many years in the medical device industry. And now I'm sort of in this phase of, I call myself systems engineer translated to systems entrepreneur for global education. Today, I'm talking to you sitting in Uganda with my team here in Uganda. So I am very blessed to have had many mentors, many coaches, and a common theme, I think, for all of us is we are all learners and we are all teachers. Back to you, Carrie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erna. So let's start at the 1,000-foot level and talk about the difference of mentorships versus sponsorships and why it is both are so critically important. Bindu, share your perspective.
Sure, I'd love to. You know, I think throughout my career, I've heard so many terms being thrown out there: coach, sponsor, mentor, connector. And I think for me, the fundamental point of a mentor is really that person that provides that personal advice and support privately. They share the nuances of what's happening, whether it's within your company or outside, just from their own personal lessons learned. And they genuinely really have no more stake in the game than the time that they invest in you and the belief and the energy that they put forth in supporting you in your development. When I think of sponsorship, I think of that a little bit more formal. And, I'm sure many of us have heard of all the amazing sponsorship programs that are rolled out there through different vendors and different providers. But I think of a sponsor as that person that advocates for you behind those closed doors. They're thinking about your skill set. They're being strategic in terms of how they would position you or recommend you for a certain high visibility project, or even knowing that this is an area that you want to advance in skill, that they'll put you on a certain project to help you achieve that and master that. There's some recent work that was done by Ibera and O'Connor, and they talked about these different archetypes. And so I think about whether it's a mentor or whether it's a sponsor, how do you look at that person that can help you strategize your career, professionally, to navigate both? Really looking at that connector part. Who are they connecting you to, whether it be projects or people or experiences, the opportunities that they can help you think through, and then just that classic advocate. Like who can be that person that's really going to publicly advocate for you? So that's a big distinction I see between the mentor and the sponsor. Now, I also keep in mind, with a sponsor, there also has to be something in it for them as well, in terms of that, of I'm paying it forward, I'm giving back, or also encouraging them in their role within the organization.
Excellent. Carla or Erna, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Perfect.
I think, just keep in mind that, that also too, sometimes you can, sometimes your mentors actually can act as sponsors as well. but thank you, Bindu. It's a great distinction actually between the two.
I agree, Carla. Sometimes they can be one and the same, and sometimes different people serving different purposes, like you talked about, Bindu. Early in my career, when I was with a small company that was acquired by a very, very, very large organization, over 55,000 employees, I hadn't even heard or known about the concept of sponsorship. And I learned very, very quickly how critical it was to seek strong advocates when new within a very large, complex organization. That's very, very political. You need to have people that are really going to serve as your advocate when your brand isn't that known. And so many applications and purposes. So now that we've established the difference between the two, again, both equally important, we're going to delve into mentorship for the rest of the hour. Our next live event in April is going to do a deep dive on sponsorship. Certainly, if you have questions about sponsorship, feel free to put them in chat. Again, though, we're going to really delve into the subject of mentorship. And you all know there's all kinds of research that has been done proving the power of mentorships and sponsorships for women in the workplace and for men. Just to give you a few examples, according to Forbes, women who have been mentored are 5 times more likely to get promoted. 5 times. According to the National Institute of Health, compared to non-mentored employees, employees with mentors receive higher compensation and are more satisfied. One final example, a study recently done by Deloitte, women in STEM careers with sponsors are 200 times more likely to see their ideas implemented.
Wow.
I think that really speaks to the power of how critical that advocate and sponsorship is. So I think it would be really meaningful for our audience if we could couple this quantitative data with some personal stories. Carla, would you be willing to share one of the most impactful experiences you've had as a mentee?
Sure. I'll actually share 2 short ones because they're actually very different. So over 20 years ago, at that time, our president of drug development, Sue Desmond-Hellmann, who actually later went on to become the first female chancellor of UCSF and then the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but she took into a role where she was overseeing the manufacturing organization, and recognized that there weren't many women in senior leadership roles. So she asked her HR business partner if he could identify 2 women that she could mentor. So she actually reached out. And I was actually one that was chosen. And I was just like, okay, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right? I was a director level at the company and spent a year with her. And what I learned, I think what some of the most important things was how sometimes as leaders, we have to make really, really tough decisions. And that's really hard. And at that time, she had made a tough decision actually about my boss that I actually had to really think through, and got the courage to actually ask her the question, help me understand how you came to this decision. So that was an important learning. And then she left me at the end of the year. She actually said, Carla, you need to go out and mentor now. And that was really something I had never thought of. I didn't think I was senior enough. I didn't think I had something to give and offer. And I've stayed connected with her, and she's helped me through almost every major career decision along the path. The second one is a mentor that I sought after. I had recently moved back from Singapore and was taking a global assignment where I needed to understand how the Roche Global Finance Organization worked. And this was right after the Roche Genentech integration. So I really had no idea. So I didn't know the new CFO of Genentech at the time, but I asked my boss, can you connect me with Steve? Because I think he can help me. He was from Roche. I think he can help me navigate. So here's an opportunity where I sought out the mentor because I had a specific need, which was and this really complicated global finance organization, because I felt that was something that was necessary for me to be successful in my role. So my boss helped facilitate that connection. And again, it was very specific things that I was looking for. Little did I know that 10 or 11 months later, he would actually offer me a job to go work for him. So there was sort of a fun sort of outcome on that. But again, an opportunity where I actually went out and specifically asked for a mentor. And both of those relationships were incredibly impactful.
Thank you, Carla. Something that really resonated with me, just another benefit of those relationships that you have. You said that in leadership positions, you have to make some really difficult decisions, and it can be lonely. If you have the benefit of a trusted confidant that you can use as a sounding board and help to validate those decisions, makes it easier as a leader to make those tough calls. So thank you. Erna, what about you?
Well, along these lines, I would just like to add in, be careful as a mentee to not assume one mentor can be all things for you.
Mm.
In many times in my career, I've had to seek out someone similarly to what you just said, Carla, someone who will politically coach me about the dynamics in the organization. And in other cases, it might have been a technical mentor. And I might have had 2 or 3 individuals mentoring me on different facets. But I think it's very risky for any of us to assume that our mentors are infallible and also that they are all things to me as a protege. So I would just add that in.
Excellent point. Bindu, anything?
The other piece that I would add to that is it's dynamic as well. You know, what you need in one moment in time can evolve and change, and it's kind of, you know, mentor seasons as well. Reaching out to a mentor on a specific need oftentimes is what comes up in terms of, oh, I need to talk about this one challenge or help to ideate on where I'd like my career to go. And that could, you know, be a 2 or 3 session conversation, if you will. So I think not only is it dynamic, but sometimes you get a lot out of one conversation, and sometimes you feel like you need 3 or 6 months with someone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or
yeah. Or lifelong. Yes, for sure. Yeah, I think it's also really important to be mindful of seeking mentors both within your organization as well as externally, so you don't get too myopic and you continue to get that outside in perspective. I think, Brian, do we have a question that's come in?
Not yet.
Oh, I think it just came to me, so you wouldn't see it. Thank you so much. I would like to read this question. One question regarding finding sponsors. For some, it can be very uncomfortable to ask someone to support you in that way. Normally, we expect that your work would automatically draw sponsors if it is good quality. How do you overcome that inhibition? To ask someone to be a mentor is relatively easy compared to asking someone to be your sponsor. This is such an important point. Who would like to take that?
I can jump in maybe, and please, you know, for Bindu and Erna, I'm sure you guys have amazing experience as well. I think sometimes we just have to have that courage to put ourselves out there. And that was hard for me early in my career. And, you know, I had to build the courage, you know, sort of over time. But I think in terms of asking for someone to sponsor you, I mean, yes, our work should speak for itself, but not everybody always sees our work. Right. And so I think if you come at it from the perspective of saying, hey, look, you know, when I'm trying to do X, Y, or Z, when you have the opportunity, can you know, bring this up and, you know, highlight it? And if you look at it from the work perspective and advancing the business, I think it helps maybe ease a little bit of that inhibition of us, like always wanting to have others talk about us, right? I think sometimes that could be what holds us back, or it could be a saboteur for us.
Yeah, and I think this was implied in the question. Certainly, you first have to earn it, right? You have to earn seeking out that sponsor and proving your value, and starting by establishing a relationship with someone that you know sees potential in you and you feel could be a very strong advocate. And after a period of time, when you know you've gotten feedback that you and your team are really making a difference in this particular area, acknowledge all of that and saying, you know, you've talked several times about the impact that I'm having. Would you be willing to serve as my sponsor? and advocate for me. Anything
the-
else?
Yeah, I think the other part that I would add to that is definitely having courage and taking a step back to understand what am I standing in the way of for myself? What's my why? What am I afraid of? If the worst thing that they say is no, or I'm going to be embarrassed, then okay, let me decipher that and break that down. What does that mean? So I'm sure I've done things that have caused even greater fear than just asking someone for 10 to 15 minutes of their time. And so really kind of evaluating the pros and cons around that, and understanding what is preventing me and what is that fear that's holding me back.
Excellent point. Hopefully that helped. And Rick Gilbert, our founder of Power Speaking, made a point that actually is a wonderful segue into the next thing we're going to explore. And that is, he says, don't forget, mentorship needs to be a two-way street. And that is most definitely true. So we're going to talk a little bit about the various types of mentorships. My first introduction to a mentorship was a very structured, formal one. There was an application process, a matching process, and even a contract, if you will, that defined the terms of the relationship. And it was one that extended for a year plus. And those can be incredibly valuable. What I realized as I progressed through my career, though, is that it doesn't always have to be that formal and structured or even that elongated. It can come in many, many different forms. So Bindu, would you share some examples of the different types of mentorships and how you determine which approach is the best depending on one's need?
Yeah, no, I like to take a step back and think about where and how can I satisfy my head and my heart when it comes to mentoring. You know, there are the formal ones, which is probably more from a head perspective, and then the informal ones that probably are more around the heart-centered. But when you think about these formalized programs, there's value to that, right? You can get recognized, you can get nominated, you can raise your hand and let your manager know that this is something that that's important to me based on, again, organizational culture and what resources and infrastructure are put in place to support mentoring programs. But I really have found tremendous value from the informal mentorships. And oftentimes, I think those have come to me when I've been very open and just receiving feedback and diverse perspectives. If I may share, you know, I had moved to the Bay Area about 11 years ago, and I had a friend from Chicago, where I moved from, that introduced me to a friend of hers out here in the Bay. That person invited me to an event, and that is where I met Erna. Erna and I connected. And we both saw something that, oh my gosh, I need you. I just moved to the Bay Area. And she's like, I see some spark in you. I need to stay connected to you. Mm-hmm. And here we are 11 years later. And it truly was that I had no idea what to expect at this event that I was going to. I didn't know the area. And so that level of openness, you just never know when these unexpected gifts or surprises or words of encouragement come from. Yeah. And so that's been a really powerful piece. I think the other aspect is, you know, Rick alluded to it, it's a two-way street, you know, reverse mentoring. Mm-hmm. I learned so much more than sometimes I feel that I give or offer in the mentoring sessions, listening to my mentee. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, the intergenerational workforce and how, again, dynamic and diverse that not only have where we've moved from and where we continue to go to, don't underestimate that nuggets of information can come from all levels. You know, you put that poll out about early, mid, or seasoned careers. Mm-hmm. You know, being able to, with a fresh grad or high school students. I have a 14-year-old and a 14-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. I continue to learn so much from them as well, because there's that level of boundary-less understanding, and looking at ways to make connections in terms of how other people see the world or certain situations, to be able to see what are those pieces that I can apply to my own challenges.
Excellent point. Yeah, it can be very, very reciprocal. Carla, Erna, anything you'd like to share?
I would like to just echo something around learning as much from your mentee as mentor. I remember mentoring a very young woman when I was a vice president in the semiconductor industry. And she was very driven, but she said something one day to me that to this day still stands out. She said, Erna, just because I'm not traveling your road of success doesn't mean I've gotten lost.
Ooh.
And I'm like, what? And the more we talked about it, she wanted to be a mom. She didn't want to climb the corporate ladder. She sort of wanted to focus on technical expertise. And to this day, I'm very careful to not assume anyone that is asking me for advice that they're on my journey. So that was something that to this day has still stood out.
Great point, Erna. And that really leads us to the next thing that we wanted to talk about, which are the secrets to success. You just talked about one. Don't go into it making assumptions that your mentee is wanting to pursue the same type of path. So, Carla, would you share from your experience, what are some of the key ingredients essential to an effective mentorship, both from a mentee standpoint as well as mentor?
Sure. And I think these are going to be more around, I don't want to say sort of formal, but really when you're seeking out, it's, a relationship versus sort of an informal sort of chance meeting. I think for the mentee, it's really important that the mentee take the accountability to have it be mentee led. As a mentee, what objectives are you seeking out? What is it that you want to learn from your mentor? And I also think that in addition to the mentee driving it, the mentee also has to be open to really looking inward and listening to the advice and really sort of maybe being open to hearing different perspectives. I think for the mentor, Erna, you had a great point. It's that listening as well, right? And letting the mentee drive the conversation. But I also think that the mentor can ask very powerful questions, can sort of, again, perhaps challenge beliefs and assumptions that their mentee has. And Erna, you do this so well, but I also think that the role of a mentor can hold a mirror up and perhaps maybe help the mentee see some unique gifts that he or she didn't realize that they had. And again, Erna, you're just fabulous at that with whoever you meet. But it's the mentor really has to listen and coach and get, I think, the mentee thinking about things in a different way. And again, the mentee, I think, really needs to take that accountability to drive and ask and lead the conversation.
Totally agree. And when you say listen, I would say it's important that we are listening to what's being said, but also what's not being said in some cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where the powerful questions, I think, really plays a big part, is just asking those deep and thought-provoking questions.
Speaking of questions, just as a reminder, if you have any for these illustrious women, don't hesitate to put them in chat. We'd love to hear from you. And we have a few that we're going to pose for you in just a bit. All right. So talked about what it takes for a relationship to be successful, albeit when it's more of a formal one. Despite our best efforts, things can go off the rails. I know I've had that experience. What do you do when a mentorship goes wrong? How do you deal with it? Erna, I have a hunch that you have an example or two that you'd like to share.
Now, why are you picking on me? I think one of the more interesting challenges that I had with a young lady that had asked me, she had been very assertive in seeking me out to be her mentor. And I didn't know her very well, but I said, sure, let's get to know, let me see what I can help you with. And what I noticed, I began to hear in the hallways at work, she was using my name. Well, Erna said, well, Erna told me to do, Erna this, Erna this. And people started coming to me saying, look, your name is getting used in forums. And so she and I had to have a pretty harsh conversation about that's not cool, right? It's while I'm willing to mentor you and coach you on your path, it's not cool for you to be using my name to advance your own personal gain. So that's one example to be very careful of, how you're to not abuse the mentor-mentee relationship, because there's a lot of things that are discussed in confidence. And
Exactly.
Yeah. So that would be the one I would contribute.
Was she receptive to the feedback?
She was, but she couldn't stop doing it. So we did terminate. We did terminate the situation.
Sometimes that happens. Carla, do you have an example?
Yeah, this goes back many, many years, and it was a formal mentoring program that was taking place in the division of the business I was in, and was assigned a mentee. And we sort of had an informal contracting session where I talked about, hey, you drive the calendar, when we meet, you drive the topics, here's what I can provide. And the first session was just getting to know each other. But the second session, she came into my office back when we had offices, and she just sat there and didn't even ask me any questions. And so I sort of felt this awkwardness. It was and so then I started asking her some questions and reminded her that it was important for her, to drive the conversation so that she could get out of the relationship what she was looking for. So a month goes by and the same thing happened again. She just sat there. And now this, for me, it's gosh, it was uncomfortable. I'm thinking this is not a good use of my time. I don't feel like I'm meeting her needs. And that's, as a mentor, you want to, leave the conversation as energized, hopefully, as your mentee. And so I actually, the third time this happened, I said, you know what, this is not working. And I think, Erna, similar to you, I had to say, look, this is not going to work. And, perhaps maybe this is not the right time for you to be looking at a mentoring relationship. So I sort of had to fire her. And I didn't feel good about it, but it wasn't a good use of anybody's time. And so again, that's where I go back to the comment I made earlier about how it's so important for a mentee to really drive the conversation, or at least drive the initial questions and what they want to get, and drive that dialogue.
Excellent point. We have a question that's come in. On the flip side, can you give an example of a time when, as a mentee, you felt you aren't getting out of the relationship what you were looking for? Anyone have a...
No. I'm happy to answer that one. I know that before I even seek out a mentor, I kind of have a mental checklist of the things that I'd like to ask them, talk to them about. And there was one moment where I had reached out to a mentor, and they appeared very enthusiastic early on, very committed. We met in the first time, and I think it was too much, and it was overloaded. And I think for me, it was one of those points of, what could I do to slow down and maybe bring up a few things? Because at that time in my career, it was all about speed. I wanted help to answer some of these questions because there were other things that were dependent on me making certain decisions. And the mentor wanted to slow that process down. And the other part to that is, there's a very interpersonal connectedness, but then there's also these just basic hygiene factors. They wouldn't be present. They were on their phone when we were meeting one-on-one. They would take other calls, just some of the classics that seem so obvious that we shouldn't be doing. However, I struggled with this balance of, oh, they're carving out time for me. And so I just want to take whatever they give. But after the third time of meeting with them, I realized that it's not working. And so it was one of those of just having an honest conversation saying, I'm so grateful and appreciative for the time that you were able to give. I'm going to gracefully exit. And maybe in the future, it'd be great to have a one touch point kind of conversation with you, but that person wasn't really partnered with me in a way that could have been a sustainable relationship or mentorship.
Thank you, Bindu. That's such a helpful example. And having that courage to have that discussion in a very respectful and grateful way, but not to keep it going longer than it really needs to be. We have some really helpful feedback that's come in. Let's see. From Sue Riley, I'd like to point out that while women, Oh, no, sorry. Sorry, I want to get to that. I just, oh, here we go. Martha brought up an excellent point with regard to can help if you have to have that somewhat tough conversation. She said, whether it's formal or not, the contractual agreement needs to be clear up front. And I think that's such an excellent point. So both the mentor and the mentee being very conscious and explicit about the fact that we want to make this a reciprocal beneficial relationship. If in fact it's not a fit for whatever reason, we both should feel very comfortable sharing that feedback. So kind of having that understanding and expectation up front, I think can make those conversations when you have to have them a little easier. We also got, now Sue, I'll get to yours. I'd like to point out that while women mentor-mentee relationships are so valuable, don't limit yourself. Men can be very valuable mentors as well, especially in male-dominated industries. I see everyone vehemently shaking their head. Most definitely. As I mentioned, in honor of this month being focused on National Women's Month, we wanted to focus in on the women-to-women relationships. That being said, just as it's important to seek mentors within and outside of your organization, it's important to see both men and women to serve as mentors. And I know we even have some men on the session. I'm assuming to determine how they can get insights to be strong mentors and sponsors to other women. Let's see, we have a question from Jin Si Go. How, if you are matched with a mentor who is really too busy for you and not providing a lot of guidance, how do you ease off without burning bridges or offending the mentor? And that might have come in before you shared your feedback, Bindu. I think you provided just a wonderful example of, I'm so grateful and respectful of your time. I'm going to gracefully exit. And then also offering that touch point at some time in the future, I think softens it and not suggesting that you just completely want to sever the relationship. Thank you. Question.
Bindu, where were you when I had to sever the relationship with my mentee? I needed you back then 15 years ago. I probably didn't do that one so gracefully.
Carrie, so sorry to interrupt, but I think that ties into Dana's question there, just to keep the thread going. Dana's asking, so when you do gracefully exit, do you take that opportunity to give actionable feedback on the way that they can provide future connections?
So I always hate responding in this way, but it depends. It depends on the nature of the relationship with the individual. It depends on the openness and receptivity of feedback to the mentor. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things I like to think, okay, what is my intent in sharing this? Why would I want to share this? And is it to, prevent another situation of a mentee who may not feel comfortable to give that feedback? But I would always go back to, if Erna were my mentor and it wasn't going well, how comfortable is she with that feedback? And have we assessed and have we developed enough trust and connectedness mm-hmm. that feedback would be welcomed and appreciated and possibly actioned upon? So it really takes a little bit of self-diagnosis of just how comfortable you feel with that, and also of the partnership and the depth of the relationship that you have there. Carla, you were joking about, 15 years ago. One thing I've realized is that if I have this feeling in my gut that something's not right, most oftentimes the other person does too. Mm-hmm. And maybe out of that sense of obligation, I said I agreed to it. So I want to make this commitment, but my bandwidth is just ridiculous and I have too much on my plate and I can't give as much as I want to give. But I think it's important to pay attention to how you're feeling inside and looking for cues in terms of whether the other person also doesn't have time. You know, when that mentor pulled out their phone, I didn't do it in the moment, but later I did say, you know, there were a couple of times where it felt like you had other pressing issues, and please let me know when you don't have time for me. I'm okay with that because I am for the time that you can give. So
Thank
And
you.
in some cases, that just takes a lot of courage. I have a young mentee right now that I'm mentoring, and I was late to a couple of our sessions, and she actually said to me, "Is this working for you?" And while I love our time, I really want to make sure that you're able to give me what you commit to. So that took a lot of courage. So I really admired that. It really, and it was sort of like, get your act in gear, Erna.
It helped you to be real focused, right? Yeah, and you respected her for giving you that feedback. Yeah,
Totally.
great points. Brian, what other questions do we have?
Well, it looks like one of the themes that we're seeing is first kind of that initial, the initial request. What's the best way to frame a request when you want somebody to be the mentor? And Sarah asked, would the advice change if the mentee doesn't know the mentor? And then kind of again on that point, once you've established that, you've got that first meeting, what are the most important elements a mentee can bring to that conversation to help focus the relationship?
All right, great. So let's start with, how do you frame the ask? And does the approach vary depending on whether you already have a relationship with the mentor you're seeking or not?
You know, yes and no. I mean, obviously, if you know the person and have a relationship, it's probably a little bit easier to approach them. But I still think you have to be clear about what your objectives are out of the relationship, right? Is it, again, general, career guidance? Is it, understanding a specific, I think, Erna, as you put it, a technical issue? Like that's what, for me, what I needed. And I think if you don't know the mentor, it's to know enough about walking out this mentor. So it could be, you can either get the connection through somebody who knows, right, through somebody who knows that person, like, again, what I did, or you can actually just send an email and say, look, this is what I understand about you. Here's what I'm looking for specifically. And I would value, getting to learn and understand from you in these specific areas. I have always found that when people would ask me to be their mentor, if it was real general and I didn't know them, I'd be like, okay, well, why, right? So I think the more specific one can be, actually helps establish that. And again, if somebody would send me a request that was really specific and clearly they had done their homework on why they were seeking me out, I was actually really intrigued by that. Like, wow, this is interesting. I always sort of every year budgeted, X number of people that I would mentee. And if I had an open slot, I'd like, okay, well, this could be interesting. I might learn something.
I actually very much appreciate young people who are courageous, or not even young people, any individual who is courageous enough to make the ask. And it conveys to me they are seeking to learn and grow. And if I can help someone along their journey, if it's one coffee or if it's over a period of time, we'll usually talk that out in the first session. But it takes a certain sense of courage. And I would encourage everyone to just reach down and ask.
Yeah. For those of you who have attended our Confident Speaking for Women workshop, and it's woven into some of our other workshops as well, this is a wonderful opportunity to use the PrEP framework that enables you to position that ask in a very concise, compelling way. And in this example, you would start with P is for position. In this case, here's your ask. Don't hesitate to be direct in what you're asking for. give your reason. Why are you asking for that? Give an example. And that example would include the benefit that you both mutually can gain from the relationship, as well as how the business overall is going to benefit, assuming it's an internal person, and then restate your ask. That's showing courage. I don't think we got to, so you make your ask, you hopefully get a yes. And if the person says no, in my experience, I have had cases where the person I'm asking really, really would like to help, but they're just overloaded. They already, they're at capacity as it relates to the number of mentees that they're helping. In almost every case when that happens, they've recommended someone else. So if they don't volunteer that, that's another thing that you could do is say, I completely understand. Is there anyone else you might recommend that might be a good fit for me, given my needs and where I am in my career? So we talked about the ask. What about that first meeting as a mentee? How should you come to that? Are there specific questions, specific information you should be prepared to share that's going to set the stage and make the relationship as productive and effective as possible?
I can jump in on this one. I think, Carla had mentioned this earlier, kind of having a checklist of, if you will, of the kind of goals and objectives. What is the outcome that you're looking for in this session, and having clarity and an open conversation about rules of engagement. We do this in a lot of, what are our ground rules? What are going to be our, partnership norms here? Is it okay to be 5 minutes late? Do we have grace and understanding that may be the case to transition? But really thinking about, from a mentor's perspective and a mentee's perspective, mentor, what are important things for you to get out of this as well? Here's what's important for me. And so looking at it from a tactical, practical, but also just a very open, I'm trying to figure out what outcomes I'd like to achieve. Here's how I'd like to go about it. How would you recommend? What are your suggestions? What would be important for you? There's a checklist. There's that whole continuum of being super formal. A lot of the platforms out there, coaching platforms, have literally a checklist of items: introduction, overview of your career and your professional journey, 3 outcomes and goals. I mean, you can get as structured as that, or you can have it more free flowing. But I think it's the openness that you have in that first conversation to understand rules of engagement.
Sure.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Bindu. I think we have time for one more. Brian, are you seeing any themes that we could respond to, or a specific question you want to call out?
Yeah, I think, and you may have briefly touched on this already, Carrie, but there are a couple of questions about kind of your mentor network. So from the mentor side, are your answers always right, or do you sometimes, if you get a question from a mentor, when you get a question from a mentor, do you feel like you can recommend referrals? And then from the mentee side, what would be the best way about asking a mentor for a referral to another mentor in their network without offending?
I can take that one. Particularly the second half. Let's say Carla is my mentor about working within Genentech. And maybe I'm needing some coaching on, I don't know, I'll pick a subject, maybe conference, panel, presentation. And that's not her expertise area. I might say, have you ever struggled with this? And who might you have gone to for advice? Is there someone that that might specialize in helping me with this particular challenge? So I wouldn't necessarily indicate it as a long-term mentorship thing, but most of us are willing to say, oh my gosh, Bindu's got this degree in psychology and she runs her own business. Let me get you connected, right? Most of us are willing to do that for the most part.
I happen to know someone who models that behavior, Mary McGlynn. She's the master connector. She's the reason we're all here together, our president and owner of Power Speaking. All right, this went so quickly. So in the 5 minutes we have remaining, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to just share your final piece of advice. If the folks walk away with nothing else, what nugget would you like to share?
I'll jump in. I think all of us can be mentors and can give back, whether you're early in career or somebody seasoned like myself. And I think it's so important that we pay it forward. And I think is just an amazing way to do that. And you're paying it forward. I think hopefully you've heard from all of us that where we've been mentors, we've actually learned and have grown as well. So I think all of us have a role to play in that.
Completely agree. Previous organization I was a part of, we referred to it as lifting as you rise and bringing up that next generation of women. Carla, Bindu.
I think my piece to add to that is, regardless of where you are in your career, where your level of confidence rises, don't underestimate the impact that you can make in that one conversation or that one moment where someone reaches out to you. And it could be intentional and it could be unintentional.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bindu.
I think for me, it's to remember that goes back to we are all learners and we are all teachers. And I think that as a mentor, quite often, I am needing to say, what do you think about this, right? How do you see this situation? I would love to get a young person's perspective. I would love to get the perspective from another career angle. It's really important that both individuals are contributing to the growth and learning, and to make sure that if someone is giving you information that doesn't feel right, be sure to take it as a data point and not an absolute truth. Probably the second thing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's give our panelists a hand. So grateful for your time and your sage advice. And I also want to thank our audience. You provided some wonderful questions and comments. And we have a slide that we want to share. We encourage you, if you haven't already, to subscribe to Power Speaking Insights. By doing so, you'll get information on upcoming live events, access to our blog, and a whole host of other goodies. So please continue with us in this journey of learning and growing and giving back. Thank you all so very much.